Hi, folks. Welcome back to The Fault Line and another episode of our Fault Line Shorts with my partner, Kim Scribner, and I having a brief conversation about a topic that seems both relevant and timely for our listeners. Kim, what are we going to talk about this time?
At first, I'm just thinking about fault line shorts and how you're not short and the irony of that. But we're going to talk about matrix organizations and kind of how they can help organizations, but also how clarity is necessary inside organizations with them.
Yeah, and might be helpful here just to be very clear and specific. When we talk about matrixed organizations, those are generally the ones where leaders at some level have to manage their function or their area of accountability. And the folks who are tasked with executing actually have more than one line of reporting. So they may be reporting into two different functional leads. Anything you would modify on that or add
Yeah,
to?
I think that just as a simple example for folks, like you might have a marketing function. So you've got a VP of marketing or chief marketing officer that's responsible for that function. But then you've got folks that are supporting a service line in an organization or a specific business unit.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. And, you know, this is increasingly common and has been for many years now, this sort of structure. Um, and, as Kim and I were chatting ahead of this episode, you know, my view is that it's sort of a spectrum of capability and optimizing around this sort of matrix approach. At the very good end of that spectrum is the people at the top of the house are aligned. This is what we're trying to achieve. And therefore, whether you're talking to your line of reporting A or you're talking into your line of reporting B, because there's clarity on the outcome and what we're trying to achieve, you can live very comfortably there. At the other end of the spectrum, there may not be consensus at the top of the house, or there may be different interpretations. And if you're sitting in a matrixed position where you've got to deal with multiple leaders, that can create inherent tension because now you're trying to align them and sort of square their perspectives where they may simply disagree. And that's where a lot of angst shows up in the day to day for people who live inside these structures.
Yeah, you're serving 2 masters, right, so to speak. So, in the example that I gave before, right, you've got marketing responsibilities, we're launching campaigns, we're trying to hit engagement metrics and things like that. And then if your marketing lead isn't necessarily aligned with what your business lead is trying to accomplish, which is, um selling more of a specific type of item, then those things can come into conflict. You might be running a brand campaign, and that brand campaign doesn't necessarily help you sell more of something specific. In the day to day as an individual contributor can be quite confusing, right? Who am I
Absolutely.
making happy today?
Well, and that's always the trick when it gets characterized as today. That to me is one of those symptoms of, oh, it's trade-off time. And in whether as a consultant or when I was stepping into leadership positions with different organizations, one of my key diagnostics was to ask for how objectives or goals were articulated in the organization. Because if I started to see a lot of focus on a particular function versus a collective definition of success, it was usually an indicator, hey, we've got an opportunity to get better here, because there's likely going to be these trade-offs. And at the same time, this matrix structure is so common these days. I was just walking with a friend on Friday and talking about a conversation he was having because he got contacted by a recruiter from a major organization. And their first line of thinking was, oh, yeah, we can see from your track record and your LinkedIn that you have subject matter expertise, but how comfortable are you in a matrixed environment? And that was the fulcrum on which whether he was going to keep talking to them or not really
Yeah,
pivoted.
yeah. I think one of the best leadership teams that I was a member of, we use, not to throw too much consulting lingo in here, but we used OKRs, objectives and key results, but we did them
Mhm.
really well. And
Mhm.
when I say really well, what I mean is at the beginning of every week as a leadership team. So we were the product development leadership team, but I had DevOps and Agile ways of working. We had development leaders, product development leaders, and then we had quality assurance team leaders. At the beginning of every week, we established what our objectives were going to be for that week or the things we were focusing on. And then that made it a lot easier because we aligned first to share that with the people that worked for us. So even though everybody in that organization was working in a matrix because software engineers were working for the product team and things like that, it allowed us the ability to be very clear on what was necessary.
Yeah, and even, very different environment working in consumer packaged goods years ago, right? We had all of our functions. Here's, manufacturing, here's distribution, here's sales, here's marketing, et cetera. But the day-to-day work was built around the brand teams that cut across those. And one of the things that made it successful was to understand that each sort of functional representative on the brand business team, they brought a capability set and a perspective and a wisdom to the discussion of how will we collectively achieve the business results for the personal care business or the air care business or something else. And again, that's where matrixing can be incredibly powerful. And I think, something that you touched on, and again, I'd love to get your take on this, is the power of transparency and the humility to say, hey, we just aligned on this, cascade it as quickly and as openly as possible, and then listen for the feedback loop, because sometimes somebody in one of those matrix things, they'll call out where there's an inherent tension that maybe the leadership team didn't consider, or, at least it's an opportunity to provide some affirmation. Yes, we considered it, and here's why we made that choice. Does that
Yeah.
resonate with your own
Yeah,
experience?
absolutely. I mean, if you're not cascading the alignment, the alignment almost doesn't matter because people are still left guessing what the people up above decided. The other benefit, I think, of matrix organizations is that if something changes in the market landscape and the organization has to pivot what product it's focusing on or what consumer set it's focusing on, knowledge is spread further than it would in a non-matrix organization. And so it gives you a little more pivot power.
Yeah, and more efficiently, right? The thing, and again, part of our pre-conversation was how matrix organizations essentially kind of take the idea of a cross-functional team and put another layer on top that says, hey, let's formalize this because we like the way these behaviors affect our ability to compete.
Yeah. Um, it is also, it gives you a mutual accountability that doesn't exist when you're just working in departments
Yes. Yeah.
because people from multiple functions are sharing the results of the work they're
Hmm.
doing together.
Yeah, and we talk about this like it's a pretty simple thing. It can be incredibly difficult to help leadership get to that spot, right? And I think we've observed, and I know I've lived and have a few scars to prove it, the attempt to get people at a higher level, bigger titles, to actually agree on what we're trying to achieve. When you can get there, it is incredibly gratifying. But for, anybody listening, we empathize with you if you're sitting there and saying, but sales and marketing are not on the same page on this,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and I
Um,
know I've sat in conversations with direct reports of mine in the past where I'm like, why in the heck are you doing this thing? And they're like, well, so and so over here, who I report to from a matrix perspective, said that was a number one priority. I was lucky enough to have people who would say those things to me.
yes.
Oftentimes, as leaders, we're left guessing why people did things and not understanding that they got direction from somebody else. So it's something to pay attention to because you might not be able to see it either.
Yeah. So, it's like I said, for these shorts, we're trying to do stuff that feels topical and timely. And again, this one feels real, right? It feels real to the day to day that the people we work with have to grapple with on an ongoing basis. And if you find yourself coming home or sitting at lunch with colleagues and talking about why is it so and so wants me to do this thing, my boss is telling me to do something different, right? Just just understand that reflection is a little bit of evidence. Like it's a diagnostic moment for you to say, oh, maybe the problem isn't how we're executing. We've got to get on the same page opportunity.
Yeah. Get on the
Good
same
stuff.
page. Sounds easy,
Get on the
very
same page,
difficult.
alignment. And for anybody who listened to us in season 1, you know we love getting people aligned, seeing the world through similar perspectives. And that's probably a good place to draw a line under this short. Thanks, everybody, for listening. As always, Kim, thanks for bringing the wisdom and perspective. And we'll be back soon with the next episode of The Fault Line. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.